Welcome to Churchill, fellow birders. It's time for Twits and Pishers. Hello there, and welcome to one of North America's great, famous, classic bird-watching locations, Churchill, Manitoba, Canada. This is the most accessible part of the Canadian Arctic. Bird watchers come here by the droves, but I've got to warn you, when you first get here, your first impression might be a little bit scary. This is not exactly a beautiful town. Now, admittedly, it's tough living up here. It's not easy to get, things like landscaping and architecture happening, but whew, it's bleak. Bleak, bleak, bleak. There are no roads leading here. You have to get here either by plane or by train. Once you get here, there are roads, and you can drive around on them. Most people drive around on either quads or, what do you call those things? Front-end loaders, it seems like. But I don't know, it's grown on me already. The people are friendly. I haven't seen that many birds, but I'm sure that we will see birds. And even though it's cold here for the second week of June, I'm optimistic. So let's get past this culture shock thing and go bird watching. What do you think? The port town of Churchill, Manitoba is located on the shore of Hudsons Bay in the southern part of the Arctic tundra of Canada. This pond is just outside the town portion of Churchill and not quite all the way to the grain terminal portion of Churchill. There's snow on the ground. It's not exactly scenic, but it's starting to feel like northern bird watching. On the pond there are some familiar ducks, the northern pintail and the northern shoveler. All these birds with northern in their name. It starts to make sense when you get up to a place like this. But have a look at these little guys down here in the water. Phalaropes are a type of shorebird, but they act like a little duck swimming on top of the water. They have webbed feet, and they like to swim in really tight circles, which is a very characteristic behavior of them. You know, a lot of people, they don't know how to pronounce the word when they first see it in the field guides. Is it phalaropes or phalaropes or phalaropes? If I were you, I'd say phalarope. Oh, and I forgot to tell you the coolest thing about phalaropes. The male phalarope is the one with the dull colors, the female phalarope is the one with the bright colors, and the male is the one that sits on the nest and incubates the eggs and is, nicely camouflaged. They've basically switched the sex roles, and the female is the one that does all the courtship and, all those sorts of typically male things in the bird world. So, hey, how about that? Very neat. You can't get enough of phalaropes. Redneck phalaropes, the Wilson's phalarope is the one that we see further south, and even further north, the red phalarope, and who knows, maybe we'll get really lucky and see a red phalarope on the way up to its nesting ground. Hey, have a look at that. Isn't that nice? Some snow geese. A couple of Canada geese around here too. Beautiful, and they're still on their way north. They haven't made it to the breeding grounds yet. It's interesting here, the snow goose, it comes in two phases. You've got some of them that are white like snow, and some of them that are called the blue geese that are dark with a white head. And there's a couple of blue geese in that little flock there. Lots of blue geese here, although keep in mind, same species. Anyway, I was just on my way to check out some of the local roads, and had to stop to look not at those snow geese, that was a bonus, but at this shorebird here. You gotta like shorebirds and gulls if you're gonna get much out of your experience birding in Churchill. But this is a Hudsonian godwit, and isn't that a handsome bird? It's Well, I mean, you know, we see the marbled godwit down south, nice big shorebird, but this thing it's like a marbled godwit, but just that much snazzier. The red and the black on the bill is so much more intense. The underparts are such a rich tan color. It's a good-looking bird, and it's nice to see them here on the breeding grounds as well, instead of just feeding and flying and trying to get through the prairies as fast as they can. That's a gorgeous bird. Pacific loon. You know, things really change fast around here. 2 minutes ago it was sunny. 1 minute ago this big bank of fog rolled in, and now it's not really foggy, it's just kind of eerie. And I'm looking out on the mouth of the Churchill River, this gigantic, huge tidal river, and the ice has broken up. I think it broke up 4 days ago or something like that, and there's these huge chunks of ice floating by, and it's absolutely beautiful. You know, the town of Churchill is not exactly, you know, doesn't have much grandeur to it, but this is the kind of landscape that makes people fall in love with the Arctic. It's absolutely stunning out here, and there are birds riding these little ice chunks down the river mouth, and other birds swimming around in between. Lots of loons, both the Pacific loons, fairly stocky loon with the bill held horizontally, and the red-throated loons with the bill held upwards a bit. Beautiful birds. I've never seen them in the breeding plumage before, and I've never seen this many anywhere before in my life. And eiders, common eiders, the gorgeous ducks riding on these icebergs and diving in between, a few mergansers, and who knows, this is apparently the sort of place where the Ross's gull might show up at this time of year. You talk to people around this town, and that's the only bird they want to see. Everybody's talking about the Ross's gull. Have you seen the gull? Oh, we haven't seen the gull yet. We're looking for the gull. Well, if I see the gull, I'll be very happy, but if not, who cares? This is beautiful, Ross's gull or no. There's some terns going by too. Churchill has a long and interesting history, and evidence of this history is everywhere. In the 1700s, the Hudsons Bay Company spent more than 40 years building this stone fort, optimistically but incorrectly thinking it would have strategic military importance. These days, Churchill tourists are more interested in the natural than the human history, and a visit to Cape Mary will be remembered for the abundance of water pipits. These delicate, thin-billed songbirds look like something halfway between a sparrow and a thrush, which is a pretty good way to remember pipits in general. And speaking of sparrows, here's a familiar bird, the white-crowned sparrow. For beginning birders, it may come as a surprise that something so beautiful could be a mere sparrow. For more experienced observers, it is interesting to see the birds eating berries instead of seeds and insects. And the breeding population at Churchill is also noteworthy because the birds are intermediate in appearance between two subspecies, or races, of the white-crowned sparrow species. In other words, a Churchill white-crowned sparrow looks like no other. You know, if you look at a map, you'll notice that we're actually not that far north. We're still in Manitoba. We're south of 60, and we are way south of the Arctic Circle. And yet here we have the tundra ecosystem. What's it doing here? Well, it all has to do with the ice you see behind us. That is the Hudsons Bay, and it is frozen solid still in the second week of June. With all that much ice, I mean, you just can't help but cool down the rest of the environment. So when you're trying to understand the ecosystems, the environment around Churchill, it's hard not to think of the bay. I'm just scoping out the granary ponds here. You know, I got a new scope for this show, and I wanted to show it to you, partly because it's a nice scope and partly because a lot of people ask me what sort of scope they should buy for their own birding. Well, it's a complicated question, but there are two things you should keep in mind. First of all, the power, the magnification power of the scope, and secondly, the size of the front lens. Now, this is a 77mm lens at the front. That gives you lots of light gathering capacity, but you can only understand that when you think about it in relation to the power of the scope. This is also a zoom spotting scope. It goes from 20 power to 60 power. And I want you to look here at that little light spot that you see when you look at the eyepiece of the scope from a distance. That's called the exit pupil. And right now it's what, about 3 or 4 millimeters in diameter. It's quite large. It's bigger than my eyeball pupil under these lighting conditions, so there's lots of light for my eye. When you zoom down, or you zoom up, or you increase the power to 60 from 20, that exit pupil becomes much smaller. In fact, it becomes smaller than the pupil of your eye under normal viewing conditions, and for that reason the image appears much darker and you don't get quite as much detail in it. You should also remember that when you have a high power eyepiece up in the 60 range, it doesn't help you at all if there's heat shimmer or fog or anything like that. It just makes the problems worse. But it's nice to have a zoom eyepiece that goes from 20 to 60. The only real way to choose the right scope is to don't just read about them and buy the one that sounds best in the magazines. Actually look through them. Set them up in the store. Look through other birders' scopes. If you run into me, you can have a look through this one. That's the only way to choose correctly. There's some neat gulls out here. You know, if you come to Churchill for bird watching, you better like gulls. After all, the main bird that everyone's after around here is the Ross's gull. I haven't seen that yet. But there are also some cool gulls down here at the dump. And when you like gulls, you eventually wind up going to the dump, I'm afraid. But well, that's all right. This is not a bad dump. It's a very famous dump because the polar bears come here during polar bear season, which I don't think has started yet here this year. But the gulls are here. Have a look over here. There's a group of gulls. Most of them are herring gulls. There's another one in there, looks like a ring-billed gull. Very familiar gulls with dark wing tips. The herring gulls have a little red spot on the bill. But there's some big white gulls at the back of the pack there. Fairly heavy bills. I think those are glaucous gulls. I'm almost sure they're glaucous gulls, but they don't, you know, it's tricky. This whole gull identification thing is tricky. Maybe their bills aren't quite heavy enough to be glaucous gulls. Maybe not. There's another one over there on that pond in the middle of the ice with a very small bill, a completely dark bill, and that one is certainly an Iceland gull, which is a new gull for me. That's a lifer. That's great. Wonderful. And then this other gull in front of us here, this single lone wolf kind of gull, which is not, it's light, but it's not as light as the glaucous gulls and the Iceland gulls. I think that's a Thayer's gull. But you know, all of this is kind of, you know, it's guesswork. It's very challenging, very enjoyable sort of bird watching for me. But you know, you'd have to wonder if you'd come up here for bird watching yourself and spent all that money, and then you know, you wind up at a dump watching gulls. It's humorous. It's got to be humorous. It's humorous, yeah, absolutely. Thayer's gull? Yes, Thayer's gull. On the ground back in town, our cameraman spotted a silent female horned lark carrying some fluff to her nest. The male was singing in the background. There you can see her settle down on her camouflaged nest, which I must admit was not on the wild tundra but in an industrial yard next to the grain terminals. The songs of open country birds are typically high-pitched and twittering, and hearing this one from high on a power pole was a pleasant surprise for me. One of the specialty birds of Churchill, or I guess an Arctic specialty in general. Have a look at it. Isn't that a nice looking critter? It's a lifer for me. I've never seen it before in my life, and I want to tell you a little story about that bird. When I was, it would have been July the 6th, 1973, I was on the Middle Sand Hills in southern Alberta, and I saw a bird with a stripy looking head, white on either side of the tail, and the song had some melodic parts in it and some buzzy parts in it. And I thought, hey, Smith's longspur, how about that? And then I looked at the range map and realized that in the middle of the summer, the Smith's longspur is way up on the tundra, and I didn't know what to think. I mean, I was pretty sure that I was looking at Smith's longspur. And then a few days later, I realized, no, it wasn't a Smith's longspur. It was another bird with a stripy head and white on the sides of the tail, and a song with some melodic parts and some buzzy parts. It was a Lark Sparrow, which is a much more normal bird to see down on the prairies. So, I guess what I'm saying is, I felt this kind of kinship for the Smith's longspur for 22 years, but I've never seen one until today. When you're a beginning birder, you can learn a lot of things by accident, just by making honest mistakes. I wonder if anyone comes up here and sees these things and thinks they're Lark Sparrows. Hope so. You know, rare bird alerts are a good way to keep in touch with what other birders are seeing, and they're also a good way to brag about what you've been seeing yourself. Now, most places, it's a phone number. You phone the number and you hear a recording of what's been seen lately. Here in Churchill, it's a bulletin board on an unmarked building. You'd never know it was here unless you knew it was here, but this is a small place. Word travels fast. What are they seeing here? Sandhill cranes, Iceland gull at the dump. Very good. Let's see. Let's report something of our own here. My feeling is, if it's good enough to make you happy, it's good enough to report to the Rare Bird Alert, because there's always somebody who's going to say, oh yeah, I've seen that, that's not rare. And someone else is going to say, oh man, I'd love to see one of those. So, Thayer's gull, what do you figure? At the dump. Right neatly, if humanly possible. Thayer's gull, being careful to spell it correctly. That was June 8th, yesterday. Time? Man, do you ever look at your watch when you see a good bird? 12:36. Yes, indeed, 12:36. PM. Location, dump. And name, Acorn. And Dwayne Dorland on camera. He saw it too, in black and white. And Larry McDonald, On sound, heard it very clearly. Beautiful. Our contribution to the birding effort here at Churchill. Okay, here's another northern bird, in fact quite a few of them. This is the Willow Tarmigan. Now let's have a look at the female first. Of course, a ptarmigan is a kind of a grouse you recognize. And there she is. Most people, at least once, they like to say ptarmigan because that's how it's spelled. It's quite funny that way. Let's get back to the bird here. The Willow Tarmigan, the female, look at how wonderfully camouflaged she is. Blends right in with the patchy vegetation of the tundra. And that is just about as good a camouflage plumage as you're ever going to see. They're also camouflaged in the winter. They molt to an almost completely white plumage, and then they blend in with this almost completely white landscape when the snow comes. Wonderful bird. Actually, there's a male over here in the bushes that has about halfway through the molt, so he's still got quite a bit of white, but he's also going to that sort of reddish camouflage color that they have in the summer. And if you look over here behind that rock, there's another male, and he is just about completely molted into the summer plumage. What a handsome bird with those nifty red eyebrows and things like that. Whew, neat. I like the way they stretch up their head and sort of look at you, and they're quite tame, but they're not, you know, you can't get too terribly close to them, but they are tame enough that you can get good looks, especially if you have a spotting scope. I like their feet too, funny little comical feet with all those big feathers so they can walk around on top of the snow in the winter. Very funny birds. And they have a neat call too. It's hard to hear it over all these wood frog calls. It's sort of like go back, go back, go back, go back kind of a sound, and it sounds a lot like a wood frog, in fact. If you don't know what a wood frog sounds like, pay close attention, because most of what you hear here, at least most of what I'm hearing here, is wood frogs and not birds these days. Go back, go back, go back, go back, go back. Go back, come back. Turn around, go back. For those who spend all of their time at Churchill trying to build up their bird lists, a good trip will turn up 100 or more species. I fell short of that, and my list is missing a few of the classic tundra specialties, but fortunately my time here is not yet up, and many of the species that the American visitors search for so eagerly are common to me back home in Alberta. We haven't been to the scrap metal dump road yet. Well, I guess that's about all the time we've got for Churchill birding right now. I've got to tell you, when I first got here, I thought this was a terrible mistake. Cold, bleak, most other Canadians are well into summer. What are we doing here? But it's like anywhere else, you know, you hang around, it starts to become more and more normal, you warm up to it. And the people here have been really quite friendly too. Right here at the Churchill Motel, I've had a good time. Very friendly, nice place. I don't know what the rest of the accommodations are like in town, but this has been good to us. And you know, as far as the bird life goes, it hasn't been a real bird spectacle. There haven't been huge numbers of birds or anything like that. You really need refined birding sensibilities to appreciate what this place has to offer. But I think there is more to be done here. We can get more out of this place yet. There's more birds to be found, more habitats to explore. So why don't you join us again next time? Besides which, you know, the plane doesn't leave for another 2 days, so why not? I tried doing some other things. I tried fishing. Whew, it's a good thing this isn't a fishing show. Anyway, join us again next time. Until then, happy birding, and we'll see you again here in Churchill, Manitoba. What's that over there? House sparrow. Wherever you go, there's a house sparrow. Beautiful.